from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast.
USDA reorganizing its undersecretaries to focus on international trade. In agribusiness, are the hog markets running out of steam?
The reason we're picking up pork processing is because the margins allow it. We have the supply to move it, and we have the demand to absorb it.
Ken Ferry discusses the importance of maintaining key nutrients throughout the growing season, and it's Stroke Awareness Month. These kids are learning to save lives in Missouri.
Agday, brought to you by the dependable, longest-lasting Chevy Silverado.
Good morning, I'm Clint Griffiths. New USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue not wasting any time getting his house in order. The department announcing a major reorganization on Thursday. During a visit to Cincinnati, Perdue laying out a fresh org chart announcing a new USDA Undersecretary for Trade. Perdue says the 2014 Farm Bill directed the USDA to restructure its approach to international trade. The new position will focus on promoting U.S. food, fiber, and fuel around the world. Now, at USDA, the new position means another post will be lost. There's a cap on how many undersecretaries the agency can have. So Perdue says USDA is eliminating the Undersecretary for Rural Development and putting just one undersecretary in charge of farm subsidies and land stewardship, bringing the FSA and NRCS together.
We're essentially doing three major things. We've created a new mission area for international trade under a new undersecretary. Secondly, we've reconstituted our domestic-facing agencies under a newly named undersecretary. And thirdly, we've elevated the rural development to answer directly to the Secretary of Agriculture. This will be a change in the structure of USDA, but individual offices and missions will not be altered, just the lines of reporting. And a reduction in force is not part of this plan. Change can be difficult, but if we work together and embrace it, it can work for the betterment of our entire department and all the people that we serve. Because in my view, we're here to provide a USDA that's facts-based, data-driven, science-based, customer service-focused, while maintaining the highest ethical and integrity standards.
There have been more than a few turf battles between National Resources Conservation Service and Farm Service Agency over the years. So I think once you're together with them under the same power leadership, that should help some interesting and sensitive issues.
Today, the U.S. exports $135 billion in agricultural products. That's up from $71 billion just 10 years ago. Speaking of trade, a new poll says Americans have a more negative view on the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, than residents in Canada and Mexico. That's according to Pew Research Center. They say that just half of U.S. citizens believe the trade deal is good for the U.S., while 76% of Canadians and 60% of Mexicans find it positive. The research says roughly 68% of Democrats and 30% of Republicans hold a positive view in the U.S. NAFTA renegotiations are likely to get sticky. Canada now planning to push back after President Trump put tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber last month. According to Politico, while the options remain unclear, Canadian President Justin Trudeau says he's considering a request which would ban U.S. shipments of thermal coal through Canadian West Coast ports. The U.S. announced tariffs on Canadian lumber following recent changes to Canadian dairy policy that stopped some exports of U.S. product. The latest USDA supply and demand estimates were positive news for milk markets. It's forecasting better commercial exports for some products because of strong global demand. USDA is saying that exports of fat and skim solids should improve in 2018, and that's expected to help drive prices higher. The all milk price was forecast to range from $17.55 to $18.55 per hundred next year. Now through this year, prices are forecast to hold in the mid $17 range.
Yeah, so right now, from the most part, it seems like it's thankfully that demand structure that's supplying it. Maybe there's going to be some issues of production down the road, or maybe because production had been so high, we're going to see more culling happen in the future. I'm not sure is just the flat out answer, but I would say that there's enough things kind of just getting tweaked in the balance where prices, I think, are going to be supportive, and I'm not looking for things to fall apart.
The WASDE report Wednesday helping support wheat markets, USDA cutting both wheat production and yields. Winter wheat production is estimated at 1.25 billion bushels. That's down 25% from 2016 on yields of 48 bushels to the acre. Now last year set a record at more than 55 bushels per acre. Hard red winter wheat is expected to see production drop by a third compared to a year ago.
As we look at the wheat situation, the wheat is where we're going to see the biggest improvement in our surplus situation. An 8% reduction in overall acreage of wheat means that production is going to be pretty far below the usage, and we're going to drop our carryovers, stocks to use, from 52% of a year's use down to about 42%. As a consequence of that, we're going to see wheat prices improve. USDA is saying $3.90 for the 16 crop, and that we're going to move that up to $4.25 for the 17 crop. So that's a fairly substantial improvement in wheat, really driven by the big reduction in acreage that we have.
Less than 2 weeks ago, much of the Southern Plains was dealing with blizzard-like conditions. Up to 20 inches of snow fell across the Texas Panhandle and western Kansas. The heavy wet precipitation weighing on tillers and laying fields flat. David Clevenger lives just outside of Amarillo. He says so far it appears damage is minimal, and he expects an average wheat crop this year.
So we did get snow. We got about 4 to 6 inches. We didn't get the snow they got up at Dalhart or further north, 14 inches. But all that wheat, they say it laid it all down, and we've heard that it all came back up. I had a friend that he had a bunch of this, and this field did go down to some extent in the snow, but it all came back up.
Clevenger telling Agday with the price of wheat, he's harvesting most of his wheat crop for silage this year. That harvest already starting in the Texas Panhandle. Clevenger took a break to plant cotton this week. Farmers in the north are at a standstill while producers in the plains are done planting. Mike Hoffman has an update in this morning's crop comments. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Clinton. This sunrise photo comes from Sage Ray, who is near Chapman, Kansas. Sage finished corn planting earlier this week. He says some corn is already emerging. Now his part of the state did not get hit with snow. Sage says the wheat crop looks pretty good in his area since it wasn't impacted by that snow. Meanwhile, Steve Pitstick of Maple Park, Illinois has his planter parked in the shop. He sent us this photo on Wednesday of day 16 of not planting in the fields. The area has just been too wet. USDA says the whole state of Illinois is ahead of the 5-year average when it comes to planting corn. Keep in mind, that's the week ending May 7th. And taking a look at the drought monitor, not a whole lot. That continues. The worst areas continue to be the southeast as well. We'll have your forecast coming up, but first here are some hometown temps.
Here's the secret to selling old equipment. Pete's Pick of the Week lets you easily view current market prices. Just text Pete6 to 31313 to get started.
We'll look at hog markets after the break, and later Kent Ferry talks about building a nutrient program that runs from planting through harvest. And it's National Stroke Awareness Month. We'll show you kids are learning to recognize the warning signs fast. Details in Ag for Your Help.
This is Machinery Pete, inviting you to check out my new website, machinerypete.com, offering farmers tens of thousands of used equipment listings to search. Let Machinery Pete help you find and value your next piece of used equipment.
The lean hog market has been dynamic as of late. Tyne Morgan gets the download in today's analysis. Tyne?
Here now with Craig Van Dyke of Top Third. Craig, when we look at specifically this hog market, I mean, we have seen some impressive pork demand this year. Do you think that demand can continue at this pace?
Well, we just saw near record pork exports here for the month of March. We're seeing right now that China was a big buyer just a few weeks ago of Chinese pork. And when you look at competing proteins, I mean, beef is really starting to take off.
Right.
So the pork market definitely can find some market share moving into grilling season. When you've got the hog market, we're starting to see more recently a big run in the cash market, and the charts have showed a nice V bottom in the hog market. I think we have a shot at testing the recent contract highs for July, June, and August contracts here. As long as we can keep the cash moving, but we don't typically see cash rally as fast as it has right now without there being something behind the scenes. In my opinion, that's likely demand because we know supply is ample.
So what would keep a lid on these prices then? I mean, what do we need to be watching out for?
Any sort of slowdown in demand, because that's what's driving the market right now. It's demand. We know where supply is at. It's large. Now, China is the huge outlier, and as of right now, their expected pork production is expected to drop moving to the end of 17. They're culling some of the sow herd as they move their production away from rivers and waterways in China. So to fill that protein void, we have competitive global pork prices right now, and we're seeing the cash market pick that up, which, in my opinion, is moving along the lines of demand.
Craig, we really had this issue of not enough pork processing capacity, right? And then we're seeing that the Michigan plant could come online in September and the one in Iowa in August. And it seems like all of a sudden, once they ramp up to full capacity, we could have too much pork processing capacity on our hands.
The reason we're picking up pork processing is because the margins allow it. We have the supply to move it, and we have the demand to absorb it. So, will that be a major factor, a huge swing in prices? No, this is the cycles of markets. So, the expansion of pork processing is exactly what we need, and in my opinion, should be friendly as long as demand doesn't die.
All right, thank you, Craig. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be back with more Ag Day in just a moment.
For a special report on the grain markets, call toll-free at 877-TT-HEDGE. That's 877-884-3343. Get the roots your crops need by getting Radiate first. Visit lovelandproducts.com/radiate. See your CPS dealer today.
Welcome back to Ag Day. Your meteorologist Mike Hoffman. Mike, we look at the drought monitor. There are some places that have improved, but some places starting to show up that weren't there a week ago.
Right, including the Dakotas. It's not in drought yet, but nonetheless, it is starting to get drier, and we've been hearing from some of you folks about that. On the other end of the spectrum, obviously, is Florida, that is still pretty bad, but I think it's improved a little bit just in the last week. But let's go back a month. You can see how much more of the country, especially the Central Plains into the southeast, was at least somewhat dry. And we've seen things over the last 4 weeks just slowly shrink up over those areas. And you'll notice how Florida did improve in a few spots just in the last week, but not a whole lot. It takes a while to actually change things dramatically in the drought monitor. All right, let's check out the weather map. Another storm system moving through the Central Plains. Right now it's in the northwestern Arkansas. Showers around it, showers and thunderstorms along the warm front off to the east, high pressure in the northeast, kind of keeping things mainly dry. These are both weak fronts, cold front and warm front, not a lot of moisture with them. So most of the Gulf moisture is included with this storm system right here, and that's going to put down some decent rains in places in the area that could use it over the next couple of days in the southeast. Double barrel, very slow moving storm systems out west. It's going to stay kind of unsettled over the next week in the west, as you'll see on the jet stream, how we continue to see a trough sitting over those areas. Heading through tonight, you can see showers and thunderstorms moving into parts of South Carolina, Georgia, into the panhandle of Florida, and a widespread area of rain, mid-Atlantic, into parts of Pennsylvania. And then heading through the day tomorrow as we start the Mother's Day weekend, it's going to be wet for the first day of the weekend up and down the eastern seaboard. Most of the middle of the country, though, staying dry, just a shower here and there in spots along those two fronts. And you can see the next two systems, mainly the second one, has a fair amount of moisture coming off the Pacific. There's the rainfall over the past 24 hours, adding in the next 36. Most of it's going to be through the southeast into the mid-Atlantic and in the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies. Snowfall, nothing east of the Rockies, but over the next 36 hours, we'll see some start to pile up in some of the higher elevations northwest. Highs this afternoon into the 70s and 80s for most of the northern plains. Same thing in the southeast. Even though it's cool in the Great Lakes in the northeast, it's better than it has been. See lots of 40s and 50s across the Corn Belt tonight, and more 70s and 80s for much of the middle of the country tomorrow. Pretty chilly out west, though, because of that cutoff low, and you can see how that kind of sits there. Ridge stays over the middle of the country, sneaks into the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley as we head through next week. That'll warm things up even more, but that's a pretty unsettled pattern out west. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. First of all, let's go to Denver, Colorado. Partly to mostly sunny and warmer today, high of 79 degrees. Memphis, Tennessee, cloudy with some rain, maybe a thunderstorm, high of 73. And Scranton, Pennsylvania, clouds and some sunshine, maybe a shower, high 62.
Coming up, do you know what to do if your loved one has a stroke? These fifth graders are learning a lesson to use outside of the classroom. And we'll see how a good nutrient program could impact your APH. Tips from Farm Journal agronomist Ken Ferry after the break.
Ag Day is powered by Ram Trucks, America's longest lasting pickups.
good nutrient program is vital to the success of a farm's harvest season. Now, this morning in Farm Journal College TV, Ken Ferry talks program types and how to finish strong.
One of the things that we attempted to teach at Corn College is the 4 R's of nitrogen. And we're talking about rate, source, timing, and placement. And in this particular plot, we're looking mainly at the timing side of that issue. On this side over here, we put a little bit of nitrogen on with the corn planter and then came in at V12 and put the balance of the nitrogen on with the Y drop itself. On this side of me over here, we put it all on in the spring before planting one big large application, which is a lot riskier, and the challenge, can we make it to the end? But one thing it does do is it does give us adequate nitrogen on the front end. When we're thinking about delaying our application with a late season side dress or Y drop type scenario, we have to make sure we have enough nitrogen in the tank to get us to that case. In this situation, we didn't quite have enough. This corn slowed down and it started to change how it looks. So if we look at maturity, when we stress a plant before pollination, we slow it down. So if we look at these plants that we did the late application, we can see where the silk is, and we can compare that to the plants where we put it all on up front. And there's a definite maturity difference here, meaning that we've slowed this plant down. The other thing that we can notice here is stalk diameter. So the plant that was delayed with late application versus up front, this has a lot bigger stalk diameter. So that indicates early season stress, and that can come into play on our ear size. So if we put too much stress on this plant, it may move from an 18 to a 16 to a 14 around. It may shorten up its length as well. Now we're going to finish strong with both of these, and the question will be whether or not we have enough in the tank to finish this out. So if this all application up front runs out, we're going to shrink the kernel length, and we're going to definitely shrink the kernel depth. So in the end, there could be a swing in yield from one direction to the other. The ideal scenario, though, is not let this thing slow down early in its life and keep it moving all the way to the finish at the end itself. So a situation of thinking about how you're spacing your nitrogen, making sure the corn never has a bad day.
Coming up, these 5th graders learn an important lesson to save a loved one's life in the country. Next.
The Howard G. Buffett Foundation has pledged up to $1 million in relief funds to help ranchers impacted by wildfires. Please join our efforts to help ranchers get back on their feet. Details at wildfirerelieffund.org. In the country, brought to you by Kubota. Learn more about Kubota SSV Series skid steers at Kubota.com or demo one at your local Kubota dealer today.
During the time it takes to show you this story, 3 people will have a stroke. Would you know what was happening if someone you loved was one of them? During National Stroke Month, a group of nurses are showing 5th graders how to be stroke heroes by acting fast. Teresa Snow at the University of Missouri has more.
Catherine Watson and her grandfather Bill Ward are very close. The Centralia, Missouri 5th grader and her papa love spending time together.
All right, here we go.
Bill enjoys fun and games today, but in 2004, he suffered a sudden stroke.
It's like getting hit with a boulder, you know.
Now you can only use one arm to put this on.
University of Missouri Healthcare's stroke team says 5th graders, like his granddaughter Catherine, are the perfect age to learn about stroke awareness.
A lot of times, kids are the only ones around with their grandparents when something happens like this, and it can be a scary thing for them.
A stroke is the 5th leading cause of death and the #1 cause of disability for men and women. A stroke happens when a clot or rupture interrupts the blood flow to the brain. That's why a fast response to a stroke is so critical. Look for F, facial droop, A, arm weakness, S, speech problems, T, time to call for emergency help.
You know that they're not feeling okay because of their symptoms that they have, and you have to dial 911 immediately.
In the past year, more than 300 Missouri students learned to spot the symptoms of a stroke. Now Bill and other families have peace of mind, knowing that their loved ones know what to look for.
I feel pretty confident in her. She's a pretty knowledgeable gal.
From the University of Missouri, I'm Teresa Snow.
The MU Healthcare Stroke Team says even if you are unsure it's a stroke, call 911 immediately. And that's all our time this morning. We're sure glad you spent time with us and tuned in. For Mike Hoffman, Betsy Gibbon, and Tyne Morgan, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.
Agday is powered by Ram Trucks, America's longest-lasting pickups.